Hi, my name is Chris Roth. I live in downtown LA. I wanted to thank you guys for taking the steps to implement actual rent control in the unincorporated areas within the county. That is a huge step. It'd be great if we were able to expand that a whole lot more into the city itself. I'm also part of the Services Not Sweeps campaign. I'm a member of Ground Game Los Angeles. We do a lot of organizing up in Hollywood. I also work with K-Town for All, doing some basic outreach and trying to make sure that the people that are on the streets realize that not everybody thinks that they're going to be treated like criminals. One of the guys that I met with just a couple of weeks ago was talking about how awful it is that it's the sanitation departments that are out there at the head of these sweeps that make everybody feel like they are human garbage rather than human beings. And changing that aspect of things would make a huge impact on the lives of these people. Also, putting in temporary or portable toilets and showers is not something that's going to cost a ton of money, but it will go a very, very, very long way toward addressing the public health crisis that is our current homelessness epidemic. Thank you.
Hey guys, this is Chris Roth here with Bushido Squirrel with your weekly KNOCK activism wrap-up. Today we're going to be talking about this week's primary results from City Council District 12 special election, the countywide LAUSD parcel tax measure EE, and the biggest story of the week, the 2019 point-in-time homeless count in Los Angeles County. How's it going, Bushido?
It's a little bit up and a little bit down. I'm not going to lie. It's sort of been all over the board. We had one good sort of quote-unquote win, and then a huge loss, and then something that just like hurts all of our souls and is making international news because our homeless crisis is finally popping up on the radar of people outside of LA. Other than that, it's getting hot as hell out here, so summer's back with a vengeance, so I'm not looking forward to that one. But you want to go ahead and hop into CD12, and we'll at least talk about like the good election?
Sure, we can start there. All right, so Lorraine Lundquist and John Lee are officially going to be advancing to a runoff election. This is huge. City Council District 12 is the only remaining seat that isn't controlled by a Democrat on the LA City Council. Lorraine is a solidly progressive movement candidate and would be a very welcome voice at City Hall.
And we should definitely mention that John Lee is not just some Johnny-come-lately off the street. He was Mitch Englander's former chief of staff, who left after he was accused of sexual harassment. He was ultimately dropped from the lawsuit accusing him of sexual harassment. The city remained a party to the lawsuit. The city ended up settling for around $75,000. It was never disclosed exactly what happened. The woman who made the allegations works for a nonprofit in LA and has been fairly open about talking about the fact that she felt like she was wronged and that John Lee deserves to be held accountable. It's pretty telling that the city just went ahead and paid off the lawsuit. It's also unclear as to why John Lee is still continuing to run, but he definitely felt like he deserved this seat because we know in city council we have this cycle where a council member passes the seat to their chief of staff. Even for council members that we see as more progressive, like Mike Bonin was Bill Rosenthal's chief of staff. Mitch O'Farrell, not trying to say he's progressive, he was Eric Garcetti's chief of staff. This is kind of a cycle we've seen in LA, and it was very much fed by the cycle of off-year elections where city council members got to pass their seat along to whoever they wanted because they were seeing 10% voter turnout. And it was much easier for people to know and just to vote for a name that they know or know a name that they recognize and just be like, oh, who did the last guy who represented me happen to say I should vote for? Oh, he said I should vote for Mitch. Well, I can trust Eric Garcetti and other terrible voting advice.
So, Lorraine secured 6,145 votes, which was 19.01% of the total as of the closing of all of the precincts on Tuesday night. John Lee took 6,195 votes, which was 19.17%. So there were just 50 votes between them, and only 32,317 total votes counted as of the time of this recording.
Doing some back of the napkin math here on voter turnout. So it looks like voter turnout in that district was almost 20%. It was just a little bit shy of 20%.
That's good.
Because it's about 250,000 people in the district. Yeah, exactly. So, when Eric Garcetti won his seat in 2017, he saw about 11% turnout in the city of LA. And, so about 8% of us actually voted to...
Depressing.
Yeah, about 8% of us voted to keep him the mayor. But that's a pretty good turnout for like a special election that kind of came out of nowhere, was planned on very short notice, but also doing some more back of the napkin math. So $1.7 million was spent in total in the election. $2.2 million was raised by all of the candidates. These aren't any one candidate. The biggest spender out there was Scott Abrams, who came in third. Now, he was a deputy to Adam Schiff, who's the congressman, who's made quite a name for himself by going after Donald Trump for the last, however many years. It seems to be all of Schiff's stick is, taking money from big ag, big defense, and then, yelling at the president all the time. But if we do the math real quick here, we see that Lorraine had about $250,000 that she took in. John Lee had about $360,000, spent about $80,000 more than Lorraine. So those 50 votes, they cost him like $1,500 a piece. Like, those were an expensive 50 votes for John Lee to capture. And even then, like, it's not assured that he's going to maintain that lead because we've still got like late ballots coming in, right?
Yeah, exactly. So as you've definitely heard us say this before, if you've been listening to us talk about other elections, those numbers are going to continue to shift around in the coming couple of weeks as the county registrar goes through the remaining absentee ballots, which are those that arrived after the election date. Remember, you only have to have postmarked your ballot on the day of the election. So if it got mailed in and it takes a couple of days, then it all shows up and then they count them all. And then also any provisional ballots. So in case like there was some kind of an issue with your voter registration or your name didn't show up, but then they have to verify that you are in fact registered. There's a whole bunch of stuff that ends up happening. So there could very well be a decent number of folks whose votes are going to be counted in the next week and a half, 2 weeks. And once those votes come in, it's entirely possible that Lorraine could end up being the winner of this primary election, which would be fantastic.
Well, but not that being the winner of this election.
Winner. Yeah.
Well, but not that being the winner of this election gets you anything, like unless you crest 50%.
Yeah.
But like finishing first with less than 50% doesn't get you like anything special for the general. But it is a really, really good sign that you've got a lot of support, and it's also it's a
huge
really
for
good
momentum.
Yeah, and it's a really good sign that Lorraine, who is a political novice, like she's a woman who has never run for office before, has not served in any political office, was radicalized by the blowout at Aliso Canyon, which poisoned the entire neighborhood of Porter Ranch, and was like, I'm a climate scientist. I should be doing something about this, and then built a grassroots campaign from literally nothing in about 6 months. And that's insane, especially when you're looking at a special election that took $2.2 million to run. Like, that's not insignificant money. And if we look at, the sort of back of the napkin math that John Motter did in that KNOCK article, which I'll link to in the description, it would take maybe $15 to $20 million to take over all of city council, which is still a lot. We're still talking about more than $1 million per seat, but these are seats that are bigger than congressional districts, bigger than, it's more than 250,000 people as constituents, which there's other arguments to be made about, like, we shouldn't have a city council that represents that many people. Like, this is why the 15 little mayors system is broken, and why we shouldn't have people who essentially control their district without any oversight for 5 years. But all of that aside, this is a really good argument that people power can overcome money power.
Absolutely. And so for a little bit of a ground game context with all this, seeing as, we are part of ground game, and that is what we do, our team was working in coordination with Food and Water Action, knocked on over 10,000 doors over the last 8 weeks, interacting with nearly 2,000 voters, and securing almost 1,000 yes votes for Lorraine. Knocking on doors is how you get this done, folks.
Face to face, or you lose the race. Some more back of the napkin math. Look, folks, we go to a lot of cocktail bars. We have a lot of napkins. This is where we do the math. But some back of the napkin math that Ace did was for total expenditures on Lorraine's campaign, Food and Water Action and Ground Game Los Angeles accounted for about 5% of those expenditures. We were running an independent expenditure, which is sort of like a PAC, but a little bit different. You can't coordinate with the campaign, but you can spend money to push a candidate or a ballot issue. So in this case, we're running an independent expenditure through Food and Water Action and Ground Game LA. But for that 5%, we accounted for about 15% of her votes. That's kind of insane. Like, and it sounds cheap, but there's a lot of extra work that goes into this. You know, houses up in this area of town are far apart. You're putting in a lot of miles. You're definitely closing those rings on your Apple Watch every time you're going out to canvass. But it has a good turnout. And it's also one thing that shocks me, and I know this from talking to other canvassers on this election, is that you talk to a lot of voters, especially up in these suburbs where people are what I call house rich, where like that's the only asset they've got. They don't talk to a lot of other people on a regular basis. There were, elderly folks I talked to during the Katie Hill campaign where I'm pretty sure I was the only human contact they had for a couple of weeks. And it's weird because aside from being able to lobby people and be like, hey, this is a candidate who will go out there and will fight for you and is going to do the work that we need done, it just feels good on a human level to like spend 10 or 15 minutes talking to someone who hasn't had a real conversation in a bit. And it's also weird because it shows how alienated and broken these suburbs really are. It's also weird to walk around in the high desert-ish area up there and just see these gigantic energy sucks of homes and realize, John Lee doesn't have good ideas about how to fix this. Lorraine Lundquist, scientist with a data-driven and evidence-based background, will have ideas about how to fix this stuff. And it really
need more scientists in office.
Yeah, it really, kind of drew like a stark contrast between what these two frontrunners were running for and what kind of future for LA they'll build. Now, before we close this one out, I want to give some really, really big shout-outs to Carlos Amador and Stella Malo.
Absolutely.
I cannot pronounce her last name, Malolian, who is from Lane, the Los Angelinos for a Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy, and Carlos Amador, who does a lot of immigration work and works with Spanish language communities. Both of them ran also insurgent progressive campaigns. Both of them were a door-knocking model. Both of them were pretty much political novices also, and they did respectably well. I think 9% for Stella and 5% for Carlos, which for campaigns that were running on very small money and a very small number of volunteers still managed to turn out a couple thousand voters on their behalf. And that's also amazing. Like, these are people who are pushing the movement forward. And it's something that, we lose a lot in our national discourse around elections because we see it as the only win is a win. And when we're trying to shift people into thinking about movement politics and thinking about politics beyond just one election, you realize like you're not going to win every election. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have run. That doesn't mean that money or those volunteer hours were wasted. You're pushing a conversation that isn't out there. You're pushing the discourse to the left. You're letting people know that there are options. And that's how we overcome this voter disenfranchisement. That's how we overcome voter apathy, is by giving people something to vote for, not just something to vote against. Like, you need to be inspiring and you need to have an actual message and you need to show them that this matters beyond just this vote, that it's not show up every couple of years, cast a ballot, and then go home patting yourself on the back. Like, you don't get brownie points for voting, just like you don't get brownie points for breathing. You still need to do it, and good job on you for doing it, but it's not the end of this. It's just one step in this process as we build more and more power.
It's called co-governance, folks. How you build movement politics, and then you get candidates into office, and then you keep the dialogue going, and you make sure that they're doing their job.
Exactly. It's always a constant conversation. It's one where hopefully as we get more movement politics going and we get more people thinking about radical ways to reorganize government, we can see LA be less hostile. Like the matching funds for LA City Council goes a long way to helping a candidate like Lorraine Lundquist overcome the money barrier, but it's still not enough because you still have to be pretty, economically secure to run an election. You still have to be able to not work for 6, 9, or 18 months. You have to be able to staff up. You have to be able to afford that amount of work. And even if you're getting matching funds, you still have to raise money to get those matching funds. So it still leaves a lot of people whose voices should be in government locked out because they just can't afford to run. So hopefully, as we move forward over the next 5 or 10 years, we can actually get public financing of our campaigns. We can actually get some, guards against having to run a presidential election for, 4 effing years to be an actual contender. These are just... It not only hurts the candidates, it hurts voters. Like, people just can't be that plugged in for that long. It's really
extremely taxing on them.
Yeah. So
speaking of broken elections...
Oh God, no, we're not going on to Measure EE yet, but we will in just 1 second. I wanted to say on CD12, it's not over yet. The runoff is going to be held on Tuesday, August 14th. So if you're in CD12, Tuesday, August 14th, be there or mail in your ballot before that date. And if you're not in CD12 and you want to make sure Lorraine Lundquist gets onto city council, either hit up her campaign at LorraineForLA.com, just Lorraine for LA, or hit us up at Ground Game, hit us up at Food and Water Action, get involved with the Sunrise Los Angeles Hub. All of those groups are going to be out there knocking doors, calling voters, sending mailers, getting people to show up and vote. And there's a good chance that this election, the actual runoff election, is going to be a lower turnout. Like each vote will count for more. And this is a chance for us to radically reshape City Hall in one election. And I also want to point this out. Lorraine will be only one of 3 women on the City Hall, or in City Hall. One of 3 women. There are 15 seats, and right now only 2 of those seats are held by women. That is incredibly broken. 50% of our society is women. We need to start fixing that basic thing. I'm not a fan of just add women and stir, and that fights patriarchy. But at the same time, just adding women to any group of any large group of men is going to change things significantly. So if you're looking for reason to vote, if you're looking for reason to come out and make your voice heard, just a basic equity and representation should totally be at the top of your list. Yeah, let's go on to Measure EE. Before I scream really, really loudly and scare the ever-living hell out of my cats here, do you want to cover what Measure EE was going to do if it had passed?
Sure. I mean, the basic gist of it is that Measure EE was intended to raise something like $500 million to support the Los Angeles Unified School District over the coming years. This was basically a way that the district was planning on funding all of the things that they had agreed to back when the teachers' strike was happening. And it was going to get 95% of that revenue was going to be generated from commercial properties and industrial properties, and just from the wealthiest landowners. But they included, for some reason, the final 5% of that was going to be coming from residential properties, which they decided to include. And that really seems to have been the poison pill here, because it really opened up this measure to be attacked by everybody who is concerned about property taxes on their homes. So it failed. It would have needed to get 2/3 of the vote to pass. It secured, what was it?
45%. We couldn't even get a bare majority for 50. The kids. Everyone was red for Ed until their wallet would be a tiny bit lighter. Yeah, and to put this in context, to put this in context, so it was going to charge, 16 cents per square foot of improved property. So it's not like just your total square footage. Like if you have just a bare yard with a shanty on it, that's not going to incur the tax. But if you have a 10,000 square foot warehouse on a piece of land, then you're looking at $1,600 a year. Now, the average home in Los Angeles is 1,800 square feet. So the average home owner would be looking at paying $288 a year to fund education. $288 a year when the median home price in in Los Angeles is $860,000 a year. I am just so totally at a loss over the folks that thought $288 a year was way too much for them to pay. That was too much to fund education, to fund nurses, to fix our dilapidated buildings that in many cases are a health hazard to our teachers, our staff, and our students. The state of LAUSD buildings right now is so ridiculously deplorable and bad. It's because of our artificially low property taxes coming out of Prop 13. And this, I think there's a good argument to be made that Garcetti and Buettner set up Measure EE to fail. That they ran it in a special election where a lot of people weren't going to show up anyways, low turnout elections. This one had 304,000 Angelinos, or people within LAUSD, show up to vote, which is 10%-ish of our actual voting population in the city and in LAUSD. And this was set up in a way where older homeowners would show up and vote. They were almost certain to defeat it, and they were almost certain to not, even if it got the majority, it would need a supermajority to pass. why they didn't wait until the primaries in March 2019 or the general election in November 2019, I have no idea. 2020 on both of those. March 2020 or November 2020 to run the same bill. Because again, that $500 million wouldn't be raised in a year. It would be raised over the course of 12 years. This was also a property tax that would expire. That was the other thing that gets me is this was a temporary tax to get us over a hump. And as LAUSD is losing students because people are being priced out of the city, so families aren't living here anymore, and we're seeing fewer students, we're also seeing less revenue from the state because we have this incredibly stupid formula at the state level that says, oh, if you have fewer students, we just give you less money, even if the needs of those students or the needs of maintaining your buildings is greater year over year, you get less money because you don't have as many butts in seats. And it's this really stupid, perverse incentive that our state has that penalizes students who don't show up because maybe they have a disability, or maybe they're trying to work to support their family, or maybe they're unhoused and they don't have a stable place to sleep every night. And those students, if they don't show up enough, the school district has a reason to kick them out so that the state doesn't penalize the school district for not having that butt in a seat day after day, instead of understanding that, that's not a good way to do this, math, and you just pay for effing education like every other developed nation on the planet. It's but Prop 13
41st in per student spending at this point. 41st out of 50 states. The wealthiest state in the frickin' country, and we're 41st in per pupil spending.
It's just so ridiculously maddening, and especially when you look at the root cause of this, which is Prop 13. Prop 13 and property taxes in general, low property taxes serve the wealthiest. 80% of the gains from Prop 13 have not gone to working families and working homeowners. They've gone to wealthy homeowners. They've gone to landlords. They've gone to commercial property owners. Yeah. And
there's been a flip. We used to get 2/3 of our property taxes in the state came from commercial and industrial property, and 1/3 came from residential. That was back in 1978 before Prop 13 was passed. Today, it is 1/3, less than 1/3 that comes from commercial and industrial property. 2/3 of the property tax is coming from residential homeowners. It is insane because what happens is that people don't sell their businesses or the properties. They hide in LLCs. Those properties are not changing hands at nearly the rate that individual homes are changing hands. And because they don't change hands, they don't get any kind of a tax assessment on them, unless there was a major construction project that happened on them that triggered a reassessment. But even then, they can find ways to get around it, not having permits and stuff. But the point is that these companies are getting this massively subsidized tax break on their property taxes, and we get to suffer for it.
Well, and it's also one of these things, and both you and I are fans of Samuel Stein's new book, Capital City, which if you haven't read, I will throw that link in the description too. Read that effing book. It's so good. But it basically builds on Thomas Piketty's findings that insane amounts of wealth from the wealthiest 1% on the planet are locked up in property. And so when we talk about taxing the wealthy, a lot of people assume we mean income. But that's California's problem right now, is we rely too much on income from the wealthiest people in California. That wealth tends to be tied up in the stock market. When Wall Street gets a cold, California catches the flu because income taxes vary wildly year over year. Property tax assessments don't. We should be taxing property first and income second, especially because a lot of the wealthiest people know that they can just hide their money in real estate. We know that that's how Trump built his empire of crime. He basically launders money for the mafia and for oil money and for dictators across the planet through the Trump Tower properties. If you're a billionaire looking to stash wealth, you buy up some property in states or cities with low property taxes like Los Angeles, like New York. You keep your wealth hidden there, and then the income tax assessors can't come for it. This is happening across the globe. It's happening in London, it's happening in LA, it's happening in Hong Kong. In cities that should be vibrant economic engines, we see a lot of quote unquote economic activity while the average person is starving. And this, there were a couple of graphs that you shared with me today that I thought were really, really good from everyone in. 600,000 Angelenos are paying 90% of their income in rent. That's an insane
such a shocking number.
we have like 3 million renters in the city of LA. It's the vast majority of people who live in the city are not homeowners, despite the fact that the vast majority of our residential property is single-family homes. Almost those single-family homeowners are kind of a minority who have an outsized say in our politics. Even beyond that, since 2000, we've seen median income for renters drop 3%, while median rents have increased 32%. Like, we know where the crisis is and we know what's causing it. We just refuse to fix it because we have these really stupid narratives that, one, it's the dream of everyone to own a home. No, it's effing not. Two, that single-family home ownership is good. No, it's not. It eats up an insane amount of resources. It eats up an insane amount of value. It eats up an insane amount of energy. We need to move away from that. We need to stop seeing private property as the end-all, be-all of our economic output. We're stewards of the land, not owners of the land. And until we start building our cities that understand that humans are only here for a short amount of time, and that property is going to be here longer than us, we're going to just keep being stuck in this really stupid cycle of gentrification, urbanization, decay, and then regrowth, where basically a lot of damage is done, a lot of wealth is accumulated, and then when you can no longer accumulate as much wealth in that one place, the money moves to somewhere else to exploit that. Measure EE probably wasn't the best idea, even if it had been run in the right election where it could have won. It's probably not the best idea, but for me at least, there's just a lot of selfishness here showing itself and showing that we really can't rely on homeowners or people who are profiting from our society to decide they're going to pay their fair share. And it's not the homeowners who are going to suffer the ill effects of them not paying their property taxes. It's the kids in LAUSD. It's the streets that people are trying to ride on. It's our air quality as we're allowing massive commercial production to keep happening in our city. It's just this like confluence of things that keep happening for decades and decades and decades. And every time we have a chance to fix it, every time we have a chance to like move forward, we find ourselves knocked back into the same position. And if we're not making forward progress in LAUSD, we're losing ground. And that's what's really frustrating is after 30 years of standing still while the waters keep moving, we're so far behind that we need radical solutions, and we can't even pass milquetoast solutions.
So who is it that's funding the opposition to Measure EE?
It's our favorite people, Chris. It's our favorite people, like the National Association of Realtors and the California Apartment Association and the California Association of Realtors. By the way, the National Association of Realtors dropped $250,000 to stop property taxes for education, saying, oh, hey, look, this is just not the right time to do this. This isn't the right way to do this. Now, in their book, what they're not disclosing is there's never a right time to raise property taxes because they're selfish assholes who want to protect their profit over everything else and are willing to take charter shills like Tiana and roll her out as a charter school supporter and an individual supporter while not disclosing the fact that she does a lot of work carrying water for charter schools, or that the Broads are paying a lot of money for this. It's I'm gonna yell myself hoarse, Chris. I'm going to get all lightheaded and pass out if I keep going on this. But the money behind No on E was the same money that defeated Prop 10. It was wealthy organizations funded by developers and realtors who didn't want to take a small decrease to profit to allow kids to learn. And that's ultimately the same problem we keep running into, is that the wealthiest, most nefarious forces in California get to buy out our elections in order to protect their profits.
And not only do they get to buy out the elections, they also get to stymie any progress that we have in the Assembly or in the Senate whenever any good piece of legislation is introduced. They literally were the reason why everything died in the Assembly these last month or so, because they just will not let anything go through that's going to protect renters, that's going to increase, funding for the schools. None of this stuff is in compliance with their agenda, and they hold the money, so therefore they hold the power. And
the one bill that did get through, 1481, is now limited to 3 years. Like, you can only not gouge people on rent for 3 years.
Oh, yeah, and it's 10% at this point as far as what's allowed for price increases.
Yeah, well, 10% at the max, but it's still tied to CPI plus 5%.
7% plus No,
yeah,
7.
but it's no. It's 10% total. So if like CPI goes up 5%, then you could do a 10% increase with the CPI plus 5. But if CPI was
7% plus CPI.
No, I'm pretty sure it's 5. We can check on the state legislature, on the state ledge, but it's 10% is the max that you can go up. But again, it doesn't matter because it's only for 3 fucking years. Like in 2025, you can still see a 25% rent increase, and that's just not going to help. You know, we keep seeing wages stagnating, actual take-home pay stagnating, more people pushed into the gig economy where they're not making state minimum wage, let alone the $20 an hour that Lyft and Uber and DoorDash are promising you. People earn less money, and yet costs continue to go up. That just doesn't work. Like at some point, the velocity of money really matters. Real income matters. If you're not making enough money to afford your bills, you can't spend that money in taxable ways like nightlife or entertainment or food. It becomes this really destructive cycle. And we're seeing this play out. You know, on a national level today, the jobs report came out. Nationally, we only created 75,000 jobs. 100,000 jobs less than was estimated. And even that's pretty low. At the same time, full-time employment is hitting the lowest point since October 2018. We're beginning to see the brakes kick in really hard. Like this recession is going to hit hard and fast. And since California is always at the forefront, we're going to be the ones seeing the impact of that recession first and foremost. And it's going to be you and me and regular people who pay. It's not going to be the California Association of Realtors who are going to see the pain there first and foremost. We're going to see the pain. And then we're still going to be expected to pay $2,000 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment. Yeah, I mean, more back of the napkin math, and I've decided capitalism's broken and we should shoot it in the head.
Well, also to confirm, you were correct. The current iteration of AB 1482, as amended from Assemblymember Chu, does currently specify 5% plus the percentage change in the cost of living. Yeah. So I apologize. I had the wrong number. I was remembering it from the Curbed article that I had read.
Well, the 10% is still a max. So there's a max cap on rent. So like if CPI did jump to like 8%, you couldn't do a 13% rent increase. You could only do a 10% rent increase. But again, it doesn't matter because it's only in effect for 3 fucking years.
Everything is broken.
At the same time, before we move on to our next big issue, I will give some props to Scott Wiener for trying to repeal Article 34. That bill is moving forward, and that's actually a big one. Like we did have that housing win, and that one does matter when we're on the subject of like not housing and the cost thereof.
So much as it's a proposition to put up on the ballot, right?
Yeah. So again, the voters could defeat that. You know, wealthy homeowners could come out in droves and be like, allow poor people to live near me. Well, I don't fucking think so. And just continuing
November
the racist...
2020, we need to get all the voters registered, and we need to get all the voters turned out, and we need to make sure that as many renters who don't normally vote at nearly the same kind of rates as homeowners get out there and vote, because if we can repeal Article 34, that is huge.
I mean,
Sorry to interrupt your tirade.
You know, repealing Article 34 and then also doing split rolls. So like Disney has to pay its fair share of property taxes on Prop 13.
Absolutely.
Those two would be absolute landmark pieces of legislation in the state of California that would fix a lot and unlock a lot of money for us. At the same time, if you thought the No on EE campaign was brutal and full of lies and disingenuous, oh my Buddha, just wait until Disney is facing having to pay actual taxes. Like they're going to go to the
just like
mat.
Prop 10, only bigger. Yep.
I mean, how much money does Michael Eisner and Bob Iger need? Like, how much money do these assholes really need to be happy? Because I think
the answer always more.
Yeah, why? I just smashy. It's insane to me that the wealthiest state in the nation has some of the most broken roads and underserved schools in the entire country, let alone the world. And it doesn't have to. Like, the money's there, folks. The value's being created. We're just doing a terrible job at recapturing it. So let's fix that, at least, you know, half step-wise. Because as this year's point-in-time homeless count showed us, those problems aren't getting better.
No, they're not. In fact, it's bad. It's really, really bad. And you've probably seen a whole lot of news coverage on this. Like we mentioned earlier, it is making national news. 58,
international news. The French press is all over this. Really? This is the rest of the world is looking at us and saying, how did you fuck this up so badly?
Yeah, we did. So 58,936 of our neighbors are unhoused on any given night in this year. That was the results come out of it. So just for a little bit of reference,
that was the county number, not the city number.
That's the county number. Yeah, and that's correct. And that's a 12% increase for LA County over the 2018 count. The city was 36,300 folks, which is a 16% increase over what was counted in 2018. So just for a little bit of context for this, in case everybody wasn't aware of what the methodology is here, basically LA County goes out and has some of their staffers, but it's almost entirely, not almost entirely, well, the vast majority of the folks who are participating in this count over, 3 nights in the middle of January every year when it's nice and cold and raining, go out and they count how many people that they see who are homeless. And they're counting people based on the number of tents that they see, the number of cars that are clearly inhabited, and the number of people that they see sleeping on the sidewalk, tucked into alcoves or underneath overpasses, wherever, right? So one of the things that happens here is that if they see a tent, they only count it as one person. There's entirely possible, in fact, I would even say it's fairly likely that there's probably more than one person in that tent because it is the middle of January, it is cold, it is rainy. People are trying to seek shelter, and a great source of warmth when you're in that kind of a cold, nasty environment is body heat with other people sharing your space, which keeps you from freezing to death at night.
Also, there's probably a good chance that there were other tents there that were taken down because, God, there were a lot of sweeps the week before the camp. It's almost like the city and the county anticipated the count and was like, let's schedule a bunch of sweeps to make there be less tents.
Yeah, so that definitely was a thing that was supposed to be happening, or there were allegations that was happening. I can't confirm that it was something that absolutely happened, but we did hear a lot of stories about encampments being pushed out of neighborhoods and then folks from the county or volunteers showing up in areas where they knew there were encampments previously and finding that there was nothing there. And this is something that happens all the time when people are putting in these 311 requests, getting these encampments cleared out. It just moves people from one area of the city to another. And if they get moved from an area that's about to be counted into an area that's already been counted, boom, presto, change-o, there's no more homeless people that are going to be counted in that particular section of the city, which is artificially deflating our count.
And to be fair, the homeless count, the point-in-time count, comes out of the George H.W. Bush administration when there was actually a federal push to end homelessness. And they made some really good progress on ending chronic homelessness to an extent. But part of what cities and counties and states have to do in order to unlock federal funds is do this point-in-time count every year. So states and counties have kind of an incentive to make sure that they are doing this count because they get federal funds. At the same time, after the volunteer, this point-in-time count is done, researchers come back out, people who have training in social sciences and sociology come back out and sort of check the numbers and do their own sort of count. And there is some, data checking to make sure that the counts make sense and that the numbers are right. So there is some, trying to make up for some of the methodological problems. But at the same time, states and counties and cities have an incentive to show that, hey, we do have homeless people, but not too many. They want to massage the numbers. So when we're talking about 60,000 people in LA County unhoused, the real number is probably 100,000, more than that. There's a significant undercounting happening here, and there are reasons, positive and negative, for the numbers to be massaged down.
Absolutely. And one of the things that happens here is they do not count people who are couch surfing at their friend's place because they got evicted. They do not count people who are staying at weekly motels. They do not count people in cars and RVs nearly as accurately as they should, although they are still actually showing an increase in the number of people that are living in cars and RVs despite all of this. One of the actually really extremely troubling statistics that now that you've referenced the push to end chronic homelessness. Chronic homelessness is the term that is used for people who are suffering from homelessness for more than 1 year. And a very troubling aspect of the 2019 point-in-time count for LA County was that we saw a 17% increase in the number of folks who are suffering from chronic homelessness, which means that even though we saw a 12% increase in the county, we had a disproportionate number of people who are suffering from chronic homelessness, which means that they are stuck out on the street for longer, which means that we're doing a better job of taking people off of the street and getting them housed in those first few months of them being homeless, but we're failing even more for people who have been out there for a long time.
Well, and we're also seeing a dramatic rise in people who are homeless for the first time. People who got evicted, people who couldn't afford their place, people who lost a job, people who still have a job but just can't afford rent. We're seeing that number go up. To roll back a little bit, what's the impact been of Measure H and Measure H, which again is the county and state initiatives that people showed up in LA County and LA City, and by super majorities, like more than 66%. In fact, Measure H was like 70% voter approval, voted to tax themselves every time they make a purchase to pay for building permanent shelter for folks. What has been the impact of that?
So with Measure H, which is meant to be providing services for people throughout the entire county, we can say that it is making progress. It's definitely making progress. But the problem
Measure
here is
H being the county level and Measure H being the city. Yeah.
Yes, correct. So when Measure H was passed back in 2017, before that happened, it was we had 15,131 people who were placed into housing back in 2016. Measure H was then passed. The next year it jumped to 17,558 for 2017. And then this last year it was 21,631, which is great. We're talking more than 20% increase in the number of people who are actually being put into housing. But the problem here is that 27,080 folks became homeless over the same time period.
Yeah.
Which means that we had a net increase of more than 6,000 people.
This is literally bailing out the ocean with a bucket. Like, no matter how big that bucket is, there's more water coming in than is being removed.
Exactly. So one of the things that I find personally troubling with all this is that we had more than 900 people, I believe it's 918 people who died on the streets in the last year. And those people are not being counted anywhere in this. But those people are the folks who we as a society have failed the most, because nobody should be dying on the streets homeless. Nobody. That is like the absolute final revocation of human dignity for anyone living in Los Angeles, is for you to end up dying homeless on the streets. And those 918 people need to be counted.
That's 3 people a day. And that's 3 people a day that we know about. Like, the number of people dying on the street could be higher than that. There are people who are killed by homelessness, and like, being homeless in and of itself is a threat to your health. Even aside from just the health implications, the catching like MRSA or developing pneumonia or having cancer that can't be treated because you're too poor, just living on the street in the conditions of that are really stressful. And like, I flash back to the couple of weeks I spent living at the Occupy ICE LA encampment, and then the few nights I would spend for the rest of the month that I was out there. Those were sleepless nights. Like, it's hard to sleep there. It's not just that being unhoused can exacerbate mental illness. It can literally cause it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just, it definitely is a source of things like PTSD for folks. And it is dehumanizing, to say the least. One of the homeless folks who I've interacted with in Koreatown, and actually a couple of times over the last couple of years, he's a great guy, extremely charismatic, and loves to tell you stories. He talks about the fact that it is extraordinarily dehumanizing for LA's response to homelessness to be these sweeps where they're fronting it with sanitation workers.
Yep.
They're sending out sanitation workers who are treating you like you're human garbage rather than being a human being. It speaks volumes of what the city's priorities are, that they're using crews that are meant to clean things up to send them out there, and instead of providing services, they're just out there pushing them away.
And this is one thing I want to mention is the point-in-time numbers were announced at the LA County Board of Supervisors meeting on Tuesday. You were there. A bunch of folks from Services Not Sweeps were there. You know who wasn't there? Mayor Boy Eric Garcetti. You know who wasn't there? A single city council member. Like of our 14 non-indicted, non-FBI being investigated city council members who are still doing their jobs, I will give Jose Huizar a pass because nobody wants to talk to him or be seen with him. The guy's toxic. But of the 14 others, including Mike Bonin, who saw one of the largest increases in the city with a 17% increase in his district. I think San Gabriel Valley was the largest with 24% increase, but not a single city council member was in that chamber, despite the fact that that's when the biggest failure of their term is being announced. Like, that's one thing that's really blowing my mind. You know, Nuri Martinez coming out hard for the Green New Deal, not showing up for homelessness. Herb Wesson coming out for retail workers, not showing up for homelessness. Paul Koretz showing up to ban plastic bags, not showing up for homelessness. They've got to show up. This is embarrassing, and it's sad, and it's traumatic, and it sucks. They have to be in the room for this stuff. Like, we can't have our most powerful people in the city running away when our biggest failures are being talked about. And to their credit, the LA County Board of Supervisors, like, I think they had to be there by law, but all five of them were in the room. All five of them sat through comments. And I've got a couple of comments I wanted to highlight from that. You know, first off,
Mark
Adam
Thomas
Rice
did peace out real quick. He did not stick around for comments.
Yeah, fair enough. But I did have some public comments I did want to highlight. You know, Adam Rice from RJLA and LA Can gave a really great comment. I wanted to play some of his comments.
My name is Adam Rice. I'm with the Los Angeles Community Action Network. We are also with the Services Not Sweeps Coalition. For the last 15 years, the Los Angeles Community Action Network has stated to the city of Los Angeles over and over again that you cannot police your way out of homelessness. We hear publicly in newspapers and from members of this board and people in the audience that $614 million is a lot to spend on homeless services. I agree. It should be spent building up those 500 vacant lots that we have in Los Angeles, as opposed to selling them for developers for pennies on the dollar and then paying them $500,000 per unit to build. The homelessness crisis in Los Angeles is not a surprise. It was created by Mayor Eric Garcetti and perpetrated by him and the administration.
The other one I wanted to talk about was Jane Wynn from Koreatown for All. She talked about how during this very meeting, there was a surprise sweep in Koreatown.
Hi. My name is Jane. I'm from Koreatown. While we were going through the numbers and LAUSD was assuring us that they are committed to a compassionate approach to homelessness, there was an unnoticed sweep in Koreatown. A homeless woman just lost many of her things. A man lost most of his clothes, a tent, blankets, and our homeless friend lost a week's worth of food. So you can pretend that criminalization does not happen, but it happens on a daily basis. Last year, 900 people died while homeless. So that's 2 to 3 people every day. How many of those 918 people would still be alive today if they were allowed to keep their tents, blankets, medication, and other survival supplies? We can start to save lives immediately if we provide basic public health resources instead of sweeps and criminalization.
The last comment I wanted to cover was Big Money, and he goes by Big Money, and I love that. And Big Money had this to say.
Big Money.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm Morris Griffin, better known as Big Money Griff, the problem solver. And I rise today in regards to the homelessness. And if there was any way in which we can look at how we're going to resolve and solve this problem, I would ask that we have a charter amendment in the state of California saying that you cannot raise the rent for 5 years, and when you do raise the rent, you can only raise it 2 or 3%. That will stop the bleeding, but it has to be a charter amendment, and we can't let the businesses and the corporations who are realtors dupe us again. And what are we to do with them, Big Money? We're to tell them that they can take their businesses to Phoenix, Arizona, New Mexico, and buy the property there, but you're not going to displace our people here in Los Angeles. We are the city of angels, and I wouldn't have this halo for nothing if I wasn't qualified, bona fide, certified to share with you as to how we can strategize to get our people to realize that in spite of adversity, success can still be obtained. That's all of my time. Thanks for yours.
Next speaker, please.
There were a lot of folks that took the time and energy and effort to show up at this meeting. It was a 5-hour-long meeting to go over these numbers.
It was so long.
It was absolutely insane. And at the same time, like, people whose job it literally is to deal with these issues were not there. I mean, hell, even the YIMBYs showed up to argue that we need density bonuses. Like, bless their hearts. You know, Buddha bless them for trying, but coming up with the wrong answer. But at least they took the time to be there when our elected officials weren't. And that, I think, is what is angering me more about this upcoming city council election in 2020 than anything else, is these folks are up for votes again. Like, 3 of them are going to term out, as it were. But there are other people who are still running for re-election. And then, you know, like the odd numbered districts, they're up for re-election in 2022, unless we recall them before that. And I honestly, there is a big part of my, like, start some shit with people in power that wants to just recall every odd numbered district just because of this miserable failure and their inability to act like adults about this.
Absolutely. So it's totally fair criticism that the entire city council absolutely should have shown up for this. I mean, if they didn't have meetings that they were required by law to be at, they probably should have taken the time to go, you know, a couple of buildings over and been there to sit through this and be a part of this process, because I mean, there were 5 or 6 news crews that were there covering this. The room was crowded full of people who were paying attention to this entire presentation from LAUSD, which was extremely insightful. And I mean, the folks who are running like the county public health department agree with the same demands that the Services Not Sweeps people are pushing for, ourselves included, where it's like, look, we've got to treat this as a public health emergency and treat these people as human beings and get them the services they need and make sure that there's, you know, trash collection and that we're keeping these businesses from dumping all of their rotting food into the areas around these homeless encampments, which then causes rodent infestations, which then causes typhus outbreaks and all of these other things that have all these knock-on effects. Using these county and city resources to help make situations better rather than criminalize is what we need to be doing. But in the defense of the electeds, just really quick, before you jump in, I just wanted to say that the elected officials who are on the Homelessness and Poverty Committee for City Hall, those council members, including Bonin O'Farrell, Marquise Harris-Dawson, and I forget who else is on there. I apologize on that one. But they did get the exact same presentation from LAUSD the next day in that Homelessness and Poverty Committee. But everyone who was not on that board skipped it. Oh, that is true. That is absolutely true. There were no cameras there. It was in a very, very small room up on the 10th floor of City Hall. There were microphones recording everything, but there were no news crews. There was no one there to try to call them to account other than the folks that were giving public comment ahead of all of these things being announced in that committee. But we did remember what had been said the day before at the County Board of Supervisors. So
I do want to say,
still stands.
Yeah.
But yes.
I do want to say even the gadflies, like even the N-word dropping, clearly, having a hard time in life, gadflies made it to the LA County Board of Supervisors meeting. They all got kicked out because that's kind of their mission in life. But even those guys showed up and it gave a very weird spectacle of one of them saying the N-word for no good reason, getting yelled at, and then another one of them demanding to be able to say the N-word in chambers. And it's like, y'all have a point about like First Amendment and freedom of speech and everything, but we're talking about your neighbors dying on the street, and you're not helping that. Like, go be a gadfly elsewhere. The adults are trying to have a conversation. Speaking of adults having conversations, it seems like the LA Times is even beginning to understand the scope of this crisis. Like, they said vote yes on 10, and their editorial board seems to be radicalizing a little bit more, even with Steve Lopez kind of finally understanding that the scale of this crisis is going to affect him.
Absolutely. So I'm actually just going to read a bit of their scathing editorial that they put out the next day after these numbers were released. Quote, California and Los Angeles need to do more to fight homelessness even before it happens. That means supporting more tenant protection measures to hold rents at reasonable levels, stop rent gouging, and prohibit unwarranted evictions in order to keep people in their homes when they are at risk. For legislators across the state to lament the horror of homelessness today, even while refusing to pass legislation that protects tenants on the verge of homelessness, is irrational and, frankly, unconscionable. End quote. So what they're talking about there, specifically this past year's Assembly Bills 36, 1481, 1482, and if you remember from 2 weeks ago when we did a quick summary of what was going on in the legislature as a whole, two of these three bills all just completely died before getting out of the Assembly. And the one that passed, like we mentioned earlier, 1482, was so watered down by the time it got out that it can really hardly be considered a strong anti-rent gouging bill at this point. Yeah, so like we said before, 5% plus cost of inflation, maximum 10%. That's still a ton of money, and it sunsets in 3 years. I mean, come on, people. What are we supposed to be doing here to keep people in their homes if we can't even pass the most basic rent protections for tenants?
And the thing about the rent gouging bill that really just boggles my mind is, if you play the rule of 72 with compound interest, you see that, like, if you're getting a 7% rent increase every year, that means that the price of your apartment doubles in a decade. It doesn't get twice as nice. It's not like your regular, pressboard countertop is magically going to turn into a granite countertop, or you'll get a gym and a pool. No, you're just paying more for the same square footage and the same depreciating building. Also, your wages, they're not going to double every decade. My Buddha, what do we think this is? The 1940s when people actually got paid well and they had unions?
Oh, my God. Yeah, it's bleak, folks. It's super bleak, but take solace in the fact that people are out there doing organizing work on the ground every day. Come out and join us at K-Town for All on Saturdays, doing outreach at the Emmanuel Presbyterian Church, 3 p.m., 3 Saturdays out of the week, 4 of them if there's 5 Saturdays. We only spend 1 Saturday a week, talking about what the organization is going to be doing, but most of the time we're out there doing outreach to the folks in the community, providing, water, wet wipes, food, the basic, human dignity of interaction and contact, things that the city is failing to provide. Get out there and join us at Ground Game. We meet up every Thursday from 7:30 till 9, sometimes 10 o'clock, but mostly 9. We're pretty good about getting people out of there on time. 5617 Hollywood Boulevard, 2 blocks away from the Western Hollywood Metro Station. These are places where you can get involved and actually make meaningful differences. Join us at Sunrise. We've got those hub meetings that are happening, it's every couple of Sundays?
No, every first Sunday of every month, and then there's also a bunch of Zoom calls you can jump on that happen weekly. If you want to get involved, there's so much capacity out there for you to get in and get to work right now, and it's a trade-off. But here's the long and the short of it. The climate crisis is here. These issues are not getting better in the immediacy. The crisis on our border is not going away. The arable land in Guatemala that has been eroded by overproduction and by droughts and by climate effects, it's not going to suddenly spring back to life. We've got a generation or two that's going to take concerted effort to fix this. And we need to do that. It's not a matter of like, hey, recycle a little bit and that'll be okay, or go vegan. Like, those are good things and you should do them. We're not solving this through individual changes. We need systems change. We'll only get systems change when a critical mass of people stand up and show up and say, we're not going to stand for this anymore, because we know how to fix this stuff. We have the answers. We know what to do. We just don't have the traction in power. Exactly. People at the top don't want to piss off their rich donors. They don't want to scare the people who fund their campaigns. They don't want to scare the people who cut them their paychecks. They don't want to scare the people who literally control industries, which I get. But at the same time, we're literally destroying the only place in this universe we have to live. There is no planet B. It is a cold, dead vacuum outside of our atmosphere. We can't live there. And, maybe President Trump is right and Mars at some point has annexed our moon. But we're not getting to Mars anytime soon. That's not a plan where we're going to be able to flee to. This is it. This is the chance we got. And something to think about when you're like, well, is it really going to be, that bad? Imagine if human civilization, if all of this that we did collapse. And this has happened before. It happened in the Bronze Age when drought and famine and warring tribes destroyed nascent civilization, and all of the trade routes stopped being productive, and only one civilization, the Egyptian civilization, really survived. We've seen a total systems collapse happen before. If that happens to us, we've pulled all of the easy-to-get energy resources out of the ground. We got the easy oil. We got the easy coal. We got the easy-to-reach rare earth minerals. We can't rebuild this level of technology immediately. It takes millions of years to remake these kinds of fossil fuels. It takes millions of years for those geological processes to happen. We don't have millions of years. I still held out hope that squirrels will survive and will rebuild representative democracy. But, we're talking millennia for that to happen. This is it, folks. We're only going to plant 60% of the crops that we should be planting in this country this year because of the storms in the Midwest. The climate crisis is here. It's literally killing your neighbors, and we can do something to help. Let's do that so it's not futile. We can make a stand. And I don't mean to be overly urgent or doomsday apocalypse, because this isn't going to be the clap of thunder and the world comes crashing down. It's going to be the slow slouch into economic depression, into starvation, into environmental collapse. If you didn't like the movie Interstellar, you're going to hate the reality Interstellar. So hopefully this lights a fire under your ass, because there's capacity for you to help. There's capacity for us all to help, to take care of each other in big ways and small ways. But the point is for you to plug in and for you to do something and not just sit here and do nothing.
But yeah, so that is all absolutely correct. We have the ability to seize the power and make these changes. We just need to get out there and actually do it. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and listening to us week after week. We genuinely support it. Hit us up at groundgamela.org. Every dollar that you can contribute, we promise we will be putting it to good things and getting out there and changing the vote, making this stuff happen all over the city. We can't do it without you, so it's fun. Thanks.
And again, always feel free. You can follow me on Twitter at Bushido Squirrel. You can follow Chris on Twitter. What's your Twitter handle again? I keep forgetting.
Christopher Roth. It's all
Christopher
one
Roth.
Big thing.
And if you want to, you can always reach out to us through email. We're podcast at groundgamela.org. Stay safe, organize your neighbors, organize your community. We're going to survive this. We're going to thrive, but we're going to do that together. Have yourselves a lovely week.
Sorry, better to be met. 30 and more. 30 and more. Sorry, better to be met. Sorry, better to be met. more. 30 more. 30 more. 30 more.